Up here, I've made two computers. One over here, where there is a file system with a number of directories, subdirectories in there. I want to make some of those files available to the computer over here using the network in between. So, first thing we need to recognize is the system in here, the computer itself. The computer here needs, whenever someone accesses a file, to verify they are actually allowed to do so. To do that, it needs a database with all the users and what they're allowed to do. You have two versions of this one, the workgroup version and the domain version. Remember those two? Mm-hmm. Yeah. For now, I'll talk about the workgroup version. Domain version is the same except that database of users. Security access module database. In the workgroup version, it's on the computer itself. In the domain version, it's on a computer somewhere on the network. So what happens when a user tries to access a file over here? I try to access a file down here. A document down here is, oh, who are you? What is your username? And in order to log in, I need a password. Take those two, verify down in my SAM database, my security access database, and say, yes, you're okay. Once I have that one, we have the recording of who I am, what I'm allowed to do. Whenever I try to access a file, we verify, am I allowed to see that file? Am I allowed to read it? Am I allowed to write it, change it, make it, create it, all that kind of stuff. That happens internally on this machine. If I want to do it from over here, I need a user over here also. So he needs to be verified over here, otherwise he can't log on. So I have a SAM database down here where the user is created. So when I log into this one, I give the password. Those two are verified through that database, say, yes, you're okay to log on. Once I'm logged on, I say, oh, I want to get a file over here. Oh, but how do I find the file in here? To do that, we need to tell this computer is allowed to access the files over here. We do that by taking a directory, for instance this one, and saying this one is made available on the network. That is called resharing. That actually can be drawn as, oh, we make a point in the network card and say, whenever you try to access this share, then you are going to this directory. Then we set permissions on this share and define who is allowed to use it. Okay, we define Ben is allowed to use it, read and write. That means whenever I come from here, I connect to this machine. This is computer A. I connect to computer A. I connect to the share name over here. What should we call the share? Let's call it share data. I connect to the name A to share data. That means the pointer goes to this directory. Oh, when I connect to that share, verify in this SAM database that I'm actually allowed to use that share. If the share says, yes, you're allowed to read the data, fine. I am now connected to the share. Then I try to go into the subfolder. It verifies, oh, now you're trying to do something on the file system in this share, on this machine. That means the file system settings is checked for my user. Am I actually allowed to read the files and read what's inside them? Go into the subfolder. Go down here and verify, is this user allowed to access that files? If I am, I can see the files in there. The challenge is, when I log onto this machine, my user ID and password is verified against this SAN database. Once I'm logged on, I try to connect to this machine. So when I connect to the share here, I'm verified against this one. It's the same user ID, which gives me a result saying, yes, you are allowed to do it. But those two SAN databases has nothing in common. Whenever I do something over here, it's this SAN database that decides what I'm allowed to do. When I do something over here, it's this SAN database. So when I log on, it's this one that's checked. But when I connect to the share, it's this one. When I go into the file folders here, it is this one that decides what am I allowed to do. Once I get in here, I see, yes, I'm allowed to see the files. I've been granted that access. I open the file. I'm allowed to read it. Fine. File is transferred over here. Now I've read the file. I can see it in my Word. I can change it. I can update it. I can save it on this disk. If I try to save it back, first thing is verified is, am I allowed to save it according to the rules of the share? Actually, in this case, no. That was a read share. So I cannot save it. Okay, we changed the settings of the share and say, okay, you're allowed to write. Once he says, yes, you're allowed to write, go down into the folder and say, are you allowed to save the data in this folder? If not, I'm rejected. So both settings, both on the share needs to define you must be allowed to do what you want to do, otherwise the share will reject you. Then you go down to the folder, whatever you want to do on the actual file, on the actual folder, you must be allowed on the NTFS settings, on the access settings, ACL, access control lists. Be allowed to do whatever you want to do. If they say you're not allowed, then you're not allowed. Both of them has to grant you access. Very often you set the share to either full control or write access. Yes, because usually you don't use the share to actually control access, you use those over here. But if you for some reason has less here, then he will decide whatever you can do. And a typical one would be to say, oh, sharing, you have write access, not full control. Because if you want to do something where you need full control, you should be on the local machine, such as changing permissions, who's allowed to do what. Unless you're the administrator, at least, you don't want people to do that kind of stuff on your drive. But reading and writing is okay through the share, and then the lists over here handles your what am I actually allowed to do. So how do you actually set it up? Well, all your settings on the folders, go into your Explorer, not your Internet Explorer, your File Explorer. Right click on the folder, say permissions or security, go in there, set your settings. Remember to do it using groups, because if you start doing it on users, even a small change can become a very, very big job. When you have your same SAN database, have your users, give them access to groups. These are also called accounts. Have your groups, and your groups have them say they are allowed to do something. The account, groups, permissions, AGP principles. Always give the groups the actual permissions. Say group bosses can do reading, writing, updating kind of stuff. And then put whoever is a boss into the group. Do this even though you only have one boss, because the boss role, the boss function may change from day to day. It's a lot easier going in and putting Ben out of the boss group and another one in, instead of going to the folder and saying, oh, now it's another person who has that access. So setting them, simply doing it in your File Explorer. you're sharing on Windows 7 is a little bit tricky. Actually, one of the reasons is this is a little bit tricky figuring out, explaining to people how to configure this to make sharing work. And what do Microsoft do whenever something is difficult?
Make it harder?
Yeah.
They make an easy way.
They make an easy way. Because this is difficult, people don't understand this. So how do we handle that as Microsoft? Well, we make an easy way. What is an easy way? Typically called a wizard. We make a little program that handles all this for you. We make a wizard. In Windows XP, that is called simple file sharing. That is, they make a little program going in, setting all up your permissions, setting up a few groups, setting up systems, and then hocus pocus, he can access it from over here. Without the user knowing, the one who configures, knowing anything about how all this works. Disable that one, then you can actually do it the way you want to do it. Now, that even confused people more, because what happens when you use that wizard is they go in and say, oh, we need to make sharing, we need to make it easy for people, so what we do is make a sharing that can access or be accessed by anyone. And then we grant access to a guest group kind of thing that can access anything on our disk, and then sharing works. Meaning everyone can access everything. That is not what we want when we do sharing. So no one ever uses simple file sharing because it's totally crazy. Microsoft then says, oh, we need to improve in Windows 7. We need to make it even more simple so people can make it the right way. Which they tried to do, and to be honest, I don't understand what they've done. So I'm not quite sure how to actually do this in Windows 7 the way it should be done on a Windows 7 workgroup machine. Where those wizards will go in there and do some of this stuff, and I'm not quite sure what they're doing. They assume once you have a domain server, you know what you're doing, so you're allowed to do it. Problem is, in my opinion at least, Windows 7 in a non-domain setup, in a workgroup domain setup, they try to hide it and protect it and make it difficult to avoid people using it because it's difficult. Which ends up in, even if you know what you're doing, making it work correctly is quite difficult. What I have done at home, as I wanted this to work, was using the command line interface. That one works. Good old way. Setting up that way works fine.